In real life, John is security director for a Fortune 40 company. He sits on 3 boards in the Pittsburgh area. He is a member of the FBI's InfraGard unit. Here's what I'm getting at. If you guys met John in his normal everyday life, his normal everyday work environment, you would have no clue that he's one of us. We met John at last year's MUFON convention. And, did I mention that he's also the state director for Pennsylvania and West Virginia? You're in for a treat, guys. The Congress is very proud to present John Ventre.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, how many, I always have to bring up MUFON. How many MUFON members do we have in the crowd? You could just raise your hand. Very good, very good. And one of the things I always bring up to people, you're here for a reason. And you should consider joining MUFON, becoming a member. You get a monthly magazine. We have 3,000 members, 900 investigators. And you could become an investigator for MUFON. Obviously you're at this convention because you believe in it or you've had some sort of experience. So I always try to pitch MUFON to try to increase membership. MUFON's the oldest and most respected UFO organization in the world. It's interesting how it was formed in 1969 when the Project Blue Book came to an end and the U.S. Air Force concluded that UFOs are not a threat to our national security. Okay, they never said that UFOs don't exist. Their statement was that UFOs are not a threat to our national security and that they would not be investigating UFOs any longer unless they become a threat to our national security. So MUFON then was formed and said, well, we'll conduct those UFO investigations. So that's how MUFON was formed. As a matter of fact, last month the MOD in the United Kingdom, they released their UFO files and they said that they were not going to conduct any more UFO investigations. I made the suggestion to MUFON headquarters that we should come out with a similar statement that we did in 1969, that if you have a UFO report, report it to MUFON. We do have a handful of people in the UK that are MUFON members and investigators. I think it would be a good way to increase our membership also and then take over the UFO investigations. But we have 300 members, 900 certified field investigators. 2 years ago, we were getting 150 cases a month, about 1,500 a year. Presently, we're getting over 400 cases a month, about 5,000 UFO sightings a year. Now, there are 10,000 UFO sightings around the world every year. MUFON gets about half of those cases. And you just go to MUFON.com and you can put your case in or you can join MUFON. Okay, that's the opening of my website, johnventre.com. My son created that after 5 years at Penn State and $130,000. That's what I got. But he did a good job on the opening. And it opens up to the book I had written. I started this book in 1997. I wrote about 80 pages. I kind of got burnt out and then just sat it on the side for 6 years. I went back to it in 2003. Finished it up and then published it in 2007. It's really a combination of the Da Vinci Code and The Day After Tomorrow. I just want to read you the Reader's Digest depiction of the storyline. It says, this wild and freewheeling novel is fun to read for the way it throws in every contemporary crochet from UFOs to Darwin creationism controversy, terrorism, Earth-targeted asteroids, environmental disaster, Nostradamus, and just about everything the sci-fi and Discovery channels have to offer are all served up with many other hot topics for a fun theme park ride. The title is the infamous Mayan end of the world date. The world is supposed to end, but in this book, it just changes. I couldn't have wrote that. That was pretty good. And I did write it. No. I just want to read you one other thing in the book, and it really makes you wonder, because I kind of go in and out of ufology and then this 2012 prophecy. I want to read you a quote. It's 101 years old, okay? And this is what was said. Some of the most important men in the U.S. are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so pervasive, so watchful, and so complete that they better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it. That was said by President Woodrow Wilson 101 years ago. So what was the president afraid of? You know, what group is out there? Who controls everything? And that's really what you get into with your ufology. You get into it with this 2012, et cetera. Also in the back of the book, I have a section about true paranormal that's happened to me. I've actually had more paranormal experiences than I've had ufology. I've only had one sighting that happened during the Pennsylvania UFO wave in 2008. But there's a section on true paranormal experiences. And last night, I'm having dinner with Mark D'Antonio, who's the next speaker. And he's talking about why he was drawn back into MUFON. He left, he came back after he had a couple of experiences that sound very much like it was an abduction experience. And as he's telling two of his stories, I got chills. I actually started to tear up because he's describing it exactly what happened to me. So, you know, I think we're all here for a reason. I think you're drawn into this for a reason, whether you're part of that 3% of people that believe they're abducted, or there's something drawing us to this. But it was really uncanny last night to listen to what Mark was saying. And I told him when we're done here at lunch, I'm going to show him my book. I'm going to show him the page that I wrote, almost exactly word for word, what happened to him and his kids happened to me when I was living in Oklahoma in 1989. So very, it's actually kind of scary. I give 3 lectures, the 2012 Prophecy. I also do one called The Case for UFOs. We're similar to the videos, movies you saw last night, where I'll prove to you that the UFO phenomenon's real. And then I also do the 2008 Pennsylvania UFO wave that happened 2 years ago. I gave that at the MUFON Symposium last year.
Huddled on the side of a frozen Arctic mountain, the men and
we need video, sound, I should say.
The world's doomsday vault herald its imminent opening. Surrounded by miles and miles of icy wilderness, the Svalbard Global Seed Vault has been built to withstand nearly every catastrophe. Its precious contents, millions of seeds which could prove indispensable to our survival.
The vault is secure against flooding. We're well above sea level if the ice on the poles should melt. It's safe against earthquakes. We're 130 meters inside the mountain, so we should be very safe against nuclear warfare and even asteroids.
More than 1 million seeds of nearly every crop variety from nearly every country in the world will soon be stored on these shelves. The permafrost transforms the mountain into a giant freezer, but the vault has also been cooled to a further minus 18 degrees Celsius, which could keep the seeds pristine for thousands of years.
Of course, this isn't the world's only seed bank. There are more than 1,000 others in different countries. The problem is, so many are vulnerable. The collections in Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, were destroyed in their respective wars, while poorer countries like Malawi stored their collections in an ordinary household freezer, vulnerable to electricity and funding cuts. This is a backup for the world.
For a month now, the seeds have been arriving here in Svalbard. While the vault is the property of the Norwegian government, the seeds belong to the country who supplied them. The samples are being stored in these aluminium envelopes. Each holds around 500 seeds. The project is the vision of Professor Kerry Fowler. He's devoted his whole life to protecting the world's biodiversity.
Into this 2012 phenomenon. But we have these doomsday vaults that are built all over the world. There's 1,400 of them. They're seed banks. And it's organized by the Global Crop Diversity Trust Fund. They're built 300 feet above sea level. And that's interesting because if all of the ice in the world melted, it wouldn't be a water world. Sea levels would rise 200 feet. And 90% of the ice is in Antarctica in the south. Only 10% is in the north, in the Arctic Circle and Greenland. So when we talk about global warming, which we'll get into a little bit of that too, that's only occurring in the north. It's not occurring in the South Pole. But it's funny that they're being built 300 feet above sea level. They're stored at -1 degrees. It can store these seeds for 1,000 years. The interesting thing, I was watching the Discovery History Channel special, and they talked about, they were interviewing like the engineers working on it, and the comment that was made was that these vaults must be completed by 2012. I thought that was a real interesting comment. And they're there to safeguard against asteroid strikes, nuclear wars, climate change, and natural disasters. So real interesting. I don't know if you know that this is going on, but we're planning for our survival, planning for the future, possibly planning for a future event. I want to get into now talking a little bit about an asteroid, Apophis. It's not going to hit in 2012, but just the way it's handled by the media, it tells you a lot about the cover-ups and really what goes on in ufology also.
Your fate ultimately be ours.
When I look up at night and I see a quiet sky, all I can think of is there's a shooting gallery with wayward asteroids that have us in their sights.
Asteroids are chunks of rock believed to be the debris left over from the birth of the planet. They can be as small as a grain of sand or as large as the state of Texas.
I'm not worried about the black hole crumbling Earth. I'm not even worried about the gamma ray burst. I'm worried about the next asteroid.
The average handgun fires a bullet at approximately 1,000 feet per second. The average asteroid travels more than 60 times faster. And when a large enough one of these cosmic cannonballs hits a planet, the effects are catastrophic.
Look at the moon. Every night it comes out to remind us that on cosmic scale, the universe is violent. The universe can be catastrophic.
There are tens of thousands of craters on the moon, and each was caused by an asteroid impact. Even more have collided with the Earth, but weather has softened the scars.
We have a polite word for them, they're the near-Earth objects. But really, these are the things that can render us extinct.
The last species to witness a giant asteroid collision didn't live to tell about it.
So there was a major asteroid strike just off the Yucatan Peninsula. That almost certainly was the primary cause of the extinction of the dinosaurs.
To keep us from going the way of the dinosaurs, a network of professional and amateur astronomers around the globe are combing the galaxy. They map and name every asteroid they find, and so far they've located more than 100,000.
One was discovered recently, the end of 2004. Fine, it was a new asteroid. Who cares? Until you start plugging in the orbital parameters into your computer. You plug those in, and then you watch where it goes. You can project forward where you expect to find this thing in the future. You know what we found? This asteroid, on Friday the 13th, April 2029, will come close enough to Earth to dip below our communication satellites in orbit around Earth.
This asteroid called Apophis will just miss us on this go-round. However, depending on how the Earth's gravity affects its orbit, we may not be so lucky when it returns 7 years later.
Depending on exactly where it passes in 2029, there's a decent chance, small, but a very noticeable chance, 1 in a 2000 that it will then strike the Earth in 2036, actually on April 13th again.
If Apophis does hit the Earth in 2036, the effect would be devastating. It would create a tsunami hundreds of feet high that could race across the ocean at supersonic speed.
It's big enough to create the worst damage to life on Earth in recorded history.
Okay, I'm leading up to 2012 and some different things that may happen, but we've identified 1,100 of these large objects, these asteroids, that they're 1 mile wide. China and the United States have the most asteroid strikes. In 2004, we discovered Apophis. And it's a half-mile wide asteroid. It has a 2.8% chance of hitting. That's a 1 in 37 chance of hitting. Those type of strikes occur every 70,000 years. It's not a planet killer. If it hit, it would take out a country. Matter of fact, the trajectory on it is into Nigeria if it hits, and it would wipe out the country of Nigeria, but it's not a planet killer. It mentions how in 2029, our satellites are at 26,000 miles. This asteroid is going to pass by at 22,000 miles. That's how close it's passing by. And anything could knock that off path a little bit for a strike. One of the other interesting things I found was last year it passed by, April of 2008. I told everybody I know that this asteroid's coming. It's Friday. Look in the newspapers Friday and Saturday. This is incredible. Well, what do you think happened? I couldn't find one news story on this. Not one. I read my Tribune Review in Pittsburgh. I went online. I went to the USA. I went to all the newspapers, magazines. I couldn't find an article on this asteroid that's a half-mile wide that just passed by Earth, the largest near-Earth asteroid. Not one article was written. And I think, and this gets into the ufology part of it too, you know, the government keeps this stuff quiet. They keep it silent for the good of the public, not to panic the public. If you remember, in 1960, the Brookings Institute was asked to do a study on the implications of extraterrestrial contact. And I have a copy of that report. You can write to the Brookings Institute and get a copy of it. In that report, they said that society would break down, particularly religion, scientific community. You'd have panic. A lot was based on the Orson Welles panic broadcast, and that you can't tell the people the truth. It's better to just keep it quiet. And I firmly believe that the government, it has our best interests, you know, in hand. They don't want panics. They have our best interests. But, you know, I think that I can fend for myself. And we have a constitution. And I'd like to know the truth and not be spoon-fed it, you know, like a lot of our social programs and the way government operates. I can handle my own money, too. I don't need to give it out. If I do a lot of that, too. I give actually well over $1,000 to charities, some different charities. But I'd rather do it myself and not be told. Here's something else interesting that happened last year. March 2009. On 2 days' notice, we discover a 152-foot asteroid, asteroid DD45. It passed Earth at 44,750 miles, about twice the distance of our satellites, twice the distance of Apophis. It's the same size asteroid that, if you believe it was an asteroid that hit in Tunguska, Siberia, it's the same size. That was a 1908 asteroid. It flattened 80 million trees, 80 square miles. And here's the quote. The Sidling Spring Space Observatory reported that, quote, no object of that size or larger has been observed to come closer to the Earth. How did they not know about Apophis? It passed by the year before, and it's twice more than twice the size. So why aren't we being told the truth on a near-Earth object like that? And then it gets even better. June of last year, amateur astronomers and scientists, they used one of our satellites, a military satellite, and the satellite is used to track nuclear detonations on the Earth. But it also picks up anything entering our atmosphere. And if there's any amateur astronomers out there, they know you can use this, and if something comes in a bolide, a small meteor, you can go to this site and find out all about it. Well, June of last year, our government shut down the site, and they said it's classified now because they're afraid that if you use the information, you can find out where the satellite is. And I guess they're afraid somebody's going to shoot it down. Well, come on, we're in the Middle East. They can't shoot down satellites. There was no reason really to shut it down. But now you don't have the information. You don't have the information you need if something's going to enter the Earth. And I just find some of these coincidences disturbing. And it's instances like this where we're censored what we're given. We're not told the full truth. And I believe, like I said, the best interests are there to protect us. But we're adults. We're a free country. We have a constitution, and I believe that we can handle the truth. But it's not given to us, We don't get the truth about UFOs, and I'm starting to wonder if we're going to get the truth about, a near-Earth asteroid or what could be coming in 2012, which is what I'm going to speak about. Okay, that's a picture of how close Pappas is going to come to us. There's the trajectory into Nigeria. We're going to talk about supervolcanoes too. That comes up in the talk a little bit, probably in about a half hour. There are 7 supervolcanoes located in the world. This is their locations. I just want you to see where they are. Unfortunately, 3 of them are right around us, right here. So that's not a good thing. One's in Yellowstone, and we're going to talk about that. But we'll get into the supervolcanoes in a little bit. I just wanted you to see where they're located. This is what it looks like if one of those if the Yellowstone supervolcano goes off. You can see Mount St. Helens in 1980, how little ash debris there was. If Yellowstone blows, that's the ash that will come from Yellowstone, pretty much wiping out the breadbasket of the United States. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Here's something else I always like to speak about at any conference, is poll results on UFOs. And it's real interesting. If you look at 1947, that's the Roswell year, nobody knew about UFOs. 9% of people believe, when they were polled, that UFOs are real. And it stays kind of in the 40 to 50% range until 1976. How many Mensa members are out in the crowd? Okay, you're the really smart people, because I'm not a Mensa member. That's the upper 1%, I guess, of IQs. I think it's over 140. But when you ask the more educated people, or over 160, when you ask the more educated people, you see the percent goes up that they believe that UFOs are real. And then interesting, 1977, they polled airline pilots, 70%. Why? Because they've seen them. That's why 70% of them said UFOs are real. You see it drops back down into 40s. 1997, we have the Phoenix Lights over Arizona, and he got some news coverage, went back up to 72%, drops back down into the 50% range. And then you see recently, if you look at the last couple of years, and these are big polls, over 100,000 people, 445,000 people, the current generation, or what you've all been exposed to, 80, 75, 80% of the people believe that UFOs are real and that we're being visited. When asked the same questions about whether the government's lying to us about it, you can see 3 different polls. About 3 out of 4 people say we're not being told the truth by the government, that they know, and we're not being told the truth about UFOs. 14% of people have seen a UFO, so you got to report those to MUFON.com, but 14% have seen something that is unusual, and they don't know what it is. And 3% of people believe that they've been abducted. So 3% of the U.S. population is 9 million people believe they've had an abduction experience. So when some of the other presentations talk about, I've had Dr. David Jacobs speak at my conferences. They talk about the hybrid program, about abductions. That's 9 million people. And maybe that's why some of you people are here also. Okay, let's get into the 2012 prophecy. I just wanted to set the stage. And these are some of the different topics we're going to talk about: Mayan prophecy, Hopis, Edgar Cayce, Gene Dixon, the papal prophecy, Sitchin, Bible code, and of course, Revelations. Okay, the Mayans, well, all of these cultures, even I Ching, the Hindu Kali Yuga, they all have 2012 or end time prophecies. And it's funny, every culture also has stories about the Great Flood because it actually did occur. The Mayan culture that I'm going to speak about lasted from 300 BC to 1500 AD. I'm going to talk about the period of 300 to 900 AD. So all of a sudden, this Stone Age culture develops suspension bridges, astronomy, very similar to the Egyptian culture, medicine, and they developed the most accurate calendar that the world's ever seen. It's more accurate than our Gregorian calendar, and the reason it's more accurate is because they started the calendar on 12/21/2012, and they worked it backwards. So they weren't going to be off on the date. That's how they did their calendar. They also, their records also say that there's a dark rift that exists in the center of the sky. And interesting enough, in 2002, we discovered that there's a black hole in the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So how did the Mayans 800, 900, 1,200 years ago know that there's a dark rift in the center of the Milky Way galaxy? Also, we discovered in 1993 that the Earth's view of the sun rising that morning on 12/21/2012, we would be in the exact center plane of the Milky Way galaxy. That happens every 25,800 years. And that's because the Earth's rotation is off by 1 degree every 72 years. Now, interesting enough, the Mayan, one of their 3 calendars, it's on a 25,800 year cycle. Coincides with that. I mean, the coincidence with this 2012 stuff is just incredible. And I'll go into 10 or so different prophecies or coincidences. You call them what you want. But that's just a huge coincidence. The last ice age started 25,800 years ago. And I think one of the speakers, or one of the things we viewed, mentioned a more advanced civilization that existed 25,000 years ago on Earth prior to the last ice age. That last cycle of the Mayan calendar, or the start of it, I should say, 25,800 years ago, also marked the end of Neanderthal and the rise of Cro-Magnon man. Now, interesting enough, Cro-Magnon only lasted 10,000 years. Can't be evolution. You can't evolve and disappear in 10,000 years. So that Cro-Magnon man was not part of evolution. Interesting enough also, we find that Homo sapiens, we have 223 genes that are not shared by our predecessors. Not shared by Cro-Magnon, not shared by Neanderthal, not shared by apes, cavemen, as far back as you go. So, you know, the medical community, anthropology, et cetera, they kind of skip that stuff. They skip out-of-place finds. When you find tools and that are buried 2 million years ago that shouldn't be there, we kind of skip over that stuff. Just like we change global warming stats to meet what we want, you have to wonder how much evolution has changed to meet what we want. But that's what goes on, because people have agendas, and usually money is behind that. Also, in 2012, the Jewish calendar, 7,000-year calendar, ends in 2012. The Kyoto Treaty ends in 2012, and solar sunspot peaks, activity peaks in 2012. Every summer was hotter from 2000 to 2008. Now, obviously, last year cooled down. This year, obviously, looks like it's cooling down also, and they can't explain that. The most sacred Mayan text is called the Popol Vuh. It tells of extraterrestrials coming to Earth, creating a perfect human species, then destroying it and replacing it with a more dumbed-down version, us. It's a very similar story to the older Sumerian tablets from 6,000 years ago, which occurred 10,000 miles away. So how do these cultures have similar stories like that if there was no contact back then? The Mayan long count is on a 5,000, they have 3 calendars. The Mayan long count's on a 5,125-year cycle. It also ends on 12/21/2012. And I do have to say, the Mayan calendar restarts again. It's not the end. Mayans don't predict an end of the world. And I think the media has gotten that and made a big deal out of it. But it just it restarts again. It signals a change every 25,800 years. So 5,125 years ago, Stonehenge, the Great Pyramids were built in Giza. That occurred at the start of this calendar, 5,125 years ago. Some people believe that there will be a vibrational shift in our consciousness caused by the perfectly carved crystal skulls that were discovered. Here's one. Okay, you can buy that. You can buy that next door. It's not one of the real ones, but there's 13 of these crystal skulls, and people believe there's going to be a vibrational change that's going to change humans, going to change our consciousness. The Mayan legend of Kukulkan says that a Caucasian male with blonde hair rose from the sea, had an elongated skull, gave the Mayans their technology, and before returning to the sea, he said he would return on March 5th, 1519. Well, who shows up in 1519 on March 5th? And this is what was written by the Mayans. Cortez shows up. Okay, and he kind of fulfills the Kukulkan prophecy, brings diseases. 90% of the Aztecs and what remained of the Mayans passed away. They raided the Mayan gold, burned their libraries, very similar to the burning of the Library of Alexander by the Romans. And all that was discovered was 3 parchments from the Mayans that were left, where we find out about this calendar. And you know, it's interesting also, the whole Mayan story, very similar to, I don't know if you know about the Dogon tribes in Africa, Mali, part of Africa, the Dogons. They worship a twin star system, Sirius A and B. They have no technology, yet they know all about the star system. And they have a similar tale of extraterrestrials from Sirius that visited and gave us knowledge, and that they're going to return in the age of Aquarius, which is the next age coming up. Okay, let's talk about the Hopi Indians. The Hopis, basically from 500 BC to the present, they name 2012. They say, in 2012, the Earth will be shaken by an explosion that will rock North and South America. That's why I kind of showed you all that asteroid stuff. They say that there's been 3 great cleansings by an asteroid or volcano. That was the first one. It was by an asteroid or volcano, then the Ice Age, and then the Great Flood. So there's been 3 great cleansings. Sacred ones will arrive via flying shields. And this resembles Enoch, the book of Enoch with Ezekiel, when he talks about the flying wheel that he went up to. Hopis have a similar prophecy to that. Now, obviously, you know, they weren't supposed to be talking to each other. They're thousands of miles away, but yet you get these similar prophecies all around the world. Also very similar to 3rd century Roman writings that describe the fiery shield crossing the sky. The Hopis perform Kachina dances where their outfits look like spacesuits with helmets. And that's what the paintings and look like. There's been other Hopi prophecy that have come true. They said we would talk through spider webs, which people believe now meant phone lines. We'd ride in carriages without horses, they predicted. Obviously, we got automobiles. And they said that women will wear men's clothing. Well, that's come true, too. It says in the end, a purifier named Pahana will arrive to destroy all evil people. There'll be another great flood, famine, hailstorms, and this is very similar to the book of Revelations. But that's what the Hopis predict for 2012. Edgar Cayce, he's also known as the Sleeping Prophet. He saw the destruction of Japan and the west coast of the United States in 2012. He saw upheavals at both poles and a reversal of hot and cold climates. Now, this is back in the 1920s. He also predicted that the sun would have solar bursts or sunspots that would heat up the Earth. Now, he names that before any scientist knew of sunspots and solar bursts. He described that back in 1920, that that's what would change our environment, and it would heat up the environment. Another prediction, Jean Dixon. Jean Dixon had a vision of Washington, D.C. She woke up in her, I don't know if it was a hotel room, apartment, whatever she had in D.C. She woke up, she had a vision of Washington, D.C. as a barren wasteland. She also had a vision of Queen Nefertiti holding a Muslim boy, and this boy would be charismatic, a peace lover at first, and then at 50 years old, in 2012, he would become the Antichrist. Okay? Now, I won't mention his name, but our president turns 50 in 2012, the most powerful man in the world. Now, she did say that the Antichrist was born February of 1962, okay? The president was born August of 1961. But again, another coincidence. For most of the year, 8 months, our president's 50 years old. And what's the chances of having a powerful leader like that, that's a young leader that meets her prediction? She also predicted the 1967 Apollo tragedy, FDR's death, RFK, JFK, MLK assassinations. She predicted that Churchill would lose his election after winning World War II. Okay, here's another prediction, and this one, again, is it's just uncanny. In 1124 AD, Father Malachi O'Morgair, he was the first Irish saint, he wrote something called the Papal Prophecy. In that, he named every pope from 1124 to the last pope. And he says the last pope's name will be Peter, same as the first pope. He said that there will be just 266 popes. The naming of the 266th pope would start the end of days with Revelations. So what pope do you think we're up to right now with Benedict? 265. You know, it's all coincidence, maybe. There's only one left, so I don't know how old Benedict is. I don't wish him any ill harm, but it's predicted that the next pope after Benedict will start the end of days. The Vatican kept Father Malachi's writings locked away for over 400 years until the year 1595. Father Malachi also predicted his death. He wrote that 30 years earlier. It said he would die on November 2nd, 1148 in Clairvaux, France, and he did, of natural causes. He didn't commit suicide. So another 2012 prophecy. Zecharia Sitchin, some of you may have read his books, author of The 12th Planet. He theorized that there was another planet on a 26,000-year cycle. Now remember, the Mayan calendar is 25,800 years. So now this falls into that same cycle. It's on a 26,000-year cycle, and that it'll pass close to Earth in 2012. Now, I always doubted it. I mean, I've talked at conferences, people asked me to believe that, and I said no. But then, you know, and I'll tell you why I don't believe it, because out in deep space like that, it's minus 434 degrees. Solar radiation boils your blood, and it dissolves your DNA. I guess they could be living underground, but it'd be pretty cold. But then recently, I think it was about a year ago, I read that there's a dwarf star, that they believe that there's another planet out there. It circles a dwarf star, which keeps it warm enough. It's very hard to see, and you won't see it until it gets very close to the Earth. So, you know, now could be true. And Sitchin also speaks about people from that planet called the Nephilim, and that's the same as that's mentioned in the Bible. Other 2012 prophecies, they speak of the magnetic poles reversing, and we know right now scientifically that our magnetic poles are weakening. That is a fact. And we also know in the past that the magnetic poles have reversed. And we know that from geology, from the stratum of rocks, we know that the magnetic poles have reversed. The weakening of the magnetic poles, some people believe, will cause the brain waves to change, and that'll change us. So you really got two types of prophecy here. You got the destructive prophecy, and then you also have the kind of an evolutionary change prophecy that's going to occur to human beings. There's really two different theories on this. What will happen also, the weakening of the magnetic poles will cause a reversal of the poles, would wreck all of our electronics, all of our satellites, all the communications would be wrecked by a reversing of the poles. Our magnetic fields reflect radiation. Weakening would cause a greenhouse effect. It would cause the melting of the North and South Pole and severe climate change. All life support would be under stress, air, ocean, agriculture. And we know right now that that's a fact. Our magnetic poles are weakening right now. I want to talk a little bit about climate change. There's always been climate change. It's a natural process. I believe it's minimally affected by mankind. In 6000 BC, temperatures dropped 8 degrees. It's a fact. From 900 to 1300 AD, temperatures warmed up 7 degrees. Temperatures then cooled down from 1300 to 1850. Matter of fact, there was one summer that you could actually walk across the Hudson River. It was still frozen. I think it was right around 1850 there. Our planet is still warming since the last ice age. Temperatures will continue to rise until the year 2100. Matter of fact, it's predicted that it will rise 10 degrees over the next 90 years. Sea levels will rise 3 feet. Okay, there have always been, we've had 4 ice ages. 800,000 years ago, 200,000 years ago, 75,000 years ago, and 26,000 years ago, 25,800 years ago, same as the Mayan calendar. But the one thing you see there is that these ice ages are coming closer and closer together. You know, they may occur in the future every 10,000 years, every 5,000 years, but they are getting closer and closer together. Every ice age was climate change, but obviously it happened on its own. We weren't building anything. We didn't have cars, et cetera, back then. Well, maybe we did. Maybe there was another civilization that we don't know about that existed back then. Okay, one of the reasons we're not seeing water rising right now, because we know that the North, it's melting. The Greenland, the ice sheets, the Arctic, it's melting. Everybody, it's a fact that it is melting right now. But what's happening is the weight of the ice melting is causing the continental shelf to rise. That's why you're not seeing water coming over the docks, water flooding these cities, for example, because the continental shelf is rising. It's another fact. If you've ever been to Niagara Falls, how many of you have been to Niagara Falls? Okay? Well, you might be the last generation, or your kids will be the last generation to see Niagara Falls. By 2050, Niagara Falls will be a stream, because as the continental shelf lifts, it's tilting backwards. Niagara Falls will run back into Lake Erie. It'll be nothing more than a stream running, and that's a fact. I mean, you can look it up. We've got about 40 more years of Niagara Falls, and it's gone. Something else that you need to know, Antarctica in the south has 90% of the world's ice, and it's not melting. As a matter of fact, Antarctica is getting thicker at the center. As it melts in the north, there's more ice forming in the south at Antarctica. Okay, that's why you're not seeing the sea level rise that people are predicting. And I already mentioned if all the ice in the world melted, sea levels would rise 200 feet. And the cover of my book that you see has a 40-foot rise in sea level, and it shows the Great Lakes merging as the Great Lake, and all the rivers overflowing. Okay, some people believe that evolution is speeding up. When you think about it, we only use 8 to 10% of our brain capacity. We only use 3% of our DNA. That's it, 3%. So the other 97% of our DNA is considered junk DNA. I find it hard to believe that God created us with 97% junk. So you have to wonder if we're not coming into the next stage of our evolution, like that's been predicted by a lot of people, that maybe we'll use 20% of our brain capacity and 10% of our DNA. In a poll last year in March 2009, 39% of the respondents, only 39% believed in the theory of evolution. So 61% of the people do not believe in the theory of evolution. It doesn't explain everything. Some people believe that there'll be a shift in our consciousness away from materialism and towards the next level of our potential. It will be the end of a male-dominated society dependent on government and centered on war. There will be a global wake-up call. Time will seem to speed up. People will be compelled to perform righteous deeds. They'll have dreams or visions that actually come true. They'll hear voices while they're awake, and they'll see angels. There'll be an evolution of consciousness, and our psychic ability will increase. There'll be a singularity where all people are connected psychically. We will anticipate each other's thoughts and actions and sense impending danger. Crime will dramatically decrease as we would know what each person has done and what they plan to do. Obviously, you can't commit a crime if I can read your mind. So that's the next step in our evolution. This telepathic capability is the next step in being able to operate vehicles, electronics, spacecraft by using our mind. And if you think about Roswell, the crash there were no controls. So they were using their mind to operate their space vehicle. And this could be the next step for us to get to that level. Indigo or star children have been born since 1982. They are technologically savvy, they question authority, they have higher IQs than their parents, and they will refuse to support the government, pay taxes, and enlist in the military. That's funny, both my kids were born in 84 and 86, and they kind of meet that. So that's another one of the predictions that's made. Just think about what I just said. That would be a really cool scenario, obviously, if we could develop, and we really need to develop into that next level of human being to stop doing what we're doing. People ask me, well, why don't the aliens show themselves? Why don't they just show themselves, land on the lawn? And I say to them, well, okay, they look at us, and we're red, we're black, we're white, we're yellow, and look how we get along. Look how we treat each other. Now, if they did show up and they got out, and they were green, little green men, or they're probably grays, is what they are. Would you show yourself? I wouldn't. Not until we change. Okay, last year also in April of 2009, I read an article, and it's entitled, "Tibetan Monks Predict That Extraterrestrials Will Save the Earth in 2012. Tibetan monks have always used remote viewing for thousands of years. They're predicting what they see are regional wars, an increase in terrorism in 2010. In 2012, they see a nuclear war between China, India, and Russia. And I've read the possibility on that over natural resources. So they're seeing a nuclear war between those three countries. They say that extraterrestrials have been watching us and will intervene. They've intervened in the past. They'll reveal themselves so that we won't be afraid of them. We're destined to see and interact with them. Man will not be allowed to alter the future or destroy this planet. After 2012, we'll be more in tune with our spirituality and the mind-body reincarnation connection to God. That's the Tibetan monk prophecy. Okay, let's talk a little bit about Bible code. I don't know how many of you know, but there's Sir Isaac Newton, who discovered gravity. He spent more than half of his life trying to decipher the Bible because he felt that the Bible had a code in it, that the Bible had information in it that no other book had. Michael Drosnin wrote the Bible Code books. You may have read that. Bible Code 1 and 2 were the books. Very interesting. He used the Old Testament. I believe it was Gone with the Wind and War and Peace because they were similar books, same amount of words in them, same amount of lines in the books. And in a computer program, they analyzed those books. Okay. They applied numbers to the letters, and they gave it like this sequencing, and then they found words on pages that went together. And what he concluded was that the Bible is a cryptogram. It foretells the future. The future is in the Bible. We just need to figure out how to read it. They found over 50 prophecies in the Bible that came true. You can go in and look for JFK, and on the same page is assassination. Same thing with Martin Luther King. It's certain things like that came up. There were over 50 of them that showed up, and this is the Bible code. When they looked at the other two texts, there was one coincidence on the pages. So they concluded that any book you look and apply this program, you'll come up with one thing that actually came true, except for the Bible. The Bible had over 50. And if we know what to ask, like if you were to know who's going to be the leader in the future or some event, if you knew what to ask, you'd find out what that event was, and it's in the Bible. I find that absolutely amazing. When they put 2012 into the computer program of the Bible, it appeared on the same words with Earth annihilated. And in Deuteronomy 12:12, okay, think about that. Deuteronomy 12:12, it says that only God could have written the Bible. It was sealed before God. I also remember reading that the Torah is written without spaces. And what I read about it was a quote that if you change or alter a single letter, you can alter the future. So I think if you apply the Bible code to the Torah, and if there's any changes, obviously you won't get the correct readings as what the future has. Okay, many scientists right now believe that the Earth has passed its tipping point. We're headed towards a galactic midnight. We're suffering from overpopulation, pollution, ozone depletion, terrorism, climate change, economic collapse. Earthquake activity and hurricane strength has increased in each of the last 4 decades. Bats are dying from white nose syndrome. Bees are dying from colony collapse disorder. Where infected bees, they abandon the hive in a suicidal attempt not to infect the queen bee. HIV, SARS, different strains of flu are on the increase. Yet we have all the technology that would be attributed to being gods. If you've had a primitive civilization and they met us, we flew in with a Black Hawk helicopter, they'd make us gods. We have all that technology, yet we have all of these problems that are on the increase also. Buried in our DNA is a collective memory of past devastation. Evolution doesn't explain the sudden jumps or advances in development. Whole new species suddenly appear. Our DNA shows mutations in intelligence 6,000 years ago when the Bible says man was created. Medically, we had a mutation in our DNA that shows an increase in intelligence 6,000 years ago. 17,000 years ago, Homo sapiens basically replaced Cro-Magnon, and 26,000 years ago, Cro-Magnon replaced Neanderthal. I mentioned that Cro-Magnon was around for only 10,000 years. They sprung up too quickly. They couldn't have been a product of evolution. Humans have the most diseases and genetic mutations of any species on the earth. Some people believe this is because we contain the DNA of 2 species. Yet our body contains the same percentage of salt that ocean water does, and our bodies are actually the same percentage of water as there is on land. For example, if the Earth is 70% water, so are we. But there are some people that believe we have these mutations, et cetera, diseases, so much more than any other species because we contain the DNA of extraterrestrials and whatever creature we were here, apes. Okay, no discussion of prophecy would be complete without discussing Revelations. And a quote from the Bible, "A star will fall to the earth by the name of wormwood with the breaking of the 6th seal. Will this be an asteroid strike? The red horse signifies war. We've had 9/11 and Iraq. Will there be a global war for resources, as the Tibetans speak about? The black horse signifies famine. I kind of think it signifies oil, the black horse, because it seems like that's what we're most interested in. There'll be food shortages. The United States feeds 100 countries. So when you saw that super volcano I showed you, and we lose the bread belt of the United States, it's not only us. We're going to lose a lot of people around the world because we basically feed 100 countries. The pale horse signifies plague. You know, when you look at, I started to look at reasons why people die, percentages, et cetera, how many are in car accidents, et cetera. We lose 1 million people a year to malaria. 1 million people a year to malaria. Smallpox is the only plague that we ever cured. That's it. It's the only plague we ever cured. Polio is the only disease we've ever cured. So I'm on one of the boards I'm on is for juvenile diabetes in Pittsburgh, and we keep working towards a cure. But the only cure that we've come up so far was smallpox, the only disease we've ever cured. Excuse me, polio. Polio is the only disease we ever cured. And my aunt actually had polio, so that was fortunate we had a cure. So you have to wonder if what's coming is a man-made pandemic. There are only 3 species on this planet that wage war: ants, chimps, and humans. The white horse signifies the rise of the Antichrist. And what's written is that he will be charismatic, persuasive, and a peace lover at first. There'll be 7 years of bounty before this rise. You know, when you think about it, I was thinking about that, 7 years of bounty. We had September 11, 2001. Okay, now if you go the next 7 years to September of 2008, you had the boom in the stock market, you had the boom in the housing, and what happened? Then it collapsed. So we may have already just had our 7 years of bounty prior to from 2001 to 2008. Then in Revelations it says that 25%, which would be about 1.6, 1.7 billion humans will die during Revelations. The sky will go dark from what's believed to be an asteroid strike or a supervolcano. And we know that there have been 5 mass extinctions in the past. We know that that happened. It would take an asteroid of at least 1 mile in size to cause any Earth-changing event. Now, when I talked about Apophis, that was a half-mile asteroid. It would take out a country. It would take out Nigeria. It would take out France, for example. An asteroid over 4 miles would be an extinction event. And what hit in the Yucatan 65 million years ago was a 6-mile wide asteroid. When an asteroid strikes, it's not like the movie that you saw, Deep Impact, where it's moving along real slow and you can watch it coming in. Asteroid comes into our atmosphere at about 29,000 miles per hour. As a matter of fact, if you can see it, a large one this size, if you can see it, you'll be incinerated from the heat coming off of it. Comes in at 29,000 miles an hour. It strikes, it slows down, it strikes the ground at 2,500 miles an hour. The jolt is resonated like a church bell throughout the planet. 2 seconds after impact, 10 miles away, a magnitude 8 earthquake would be felt. 20 seconds later, a 700 mile per hour heat blast will incinerate everything. That's what happens when a large asteroid strikes. All right, let's talk about supervolcanoes. Okay, there are 7 supervolcanoes around the world. Unfortunately, like I showed you, 3 are located right in this area, in the southwest part of the United States or northern part of Mexico. We also know that 90% of humans died 74,000 years ago when the supervolcano in Indonesia erupted. And we know that that's a fact. We know it from female mitochondrial DNA, is where we know that the gene pool for human beings shrunk down to, what I read was there might have been just 1,200 human beings left on the planet after the supervolcano erupted. Now, that wouldn't be the same scenario with us. Obviously, we have more technology. I mean, if you're a cave-type person just getting by and you lost all your agriculture, obviously, the human race was almost wiped out 74,000 years ago from a supervolcano blast. The one in Yellowstone, and you think about Old Faithful, why it erupts. Well, it's the head of a caldera. Yellowstone Park is the top of a volcano. The volcano is 40 miles wide by 60 miles wide. It's 40,000 years overdue of blowing. Okay, so it's overdue. Last January, there were 21 tremors at Yellowstone Park. And you know, it's real interesting. I saw something on Discovery Channel. It was probably 8 to 10 years ago, and they were talking about this supervolcano. First time I ever heard it. They had these guys that go up every 5 years for vacation, doctors, lawyers, and they went to their normal spot of going fishing. The dock was here, but the lake was over here. They said, how'd that happen? So they went and got all of the, when they do the surveys, they have the tripod and they do the surveys. They paid and they redid all the surveys in the area. They found that the ground swelled up 6 feet. The lake just shifted over. The trees on the right were now under 6 feet of water. So something's going on over at Yellowstone. The caldera that blows is about half the size of Long Island, for those New Yorkers, native New Yorkers like myself, or it's the size of Puerto Rico. Now think about that. Something that size blowing. It blows straight up into our upper stratosphere. It blows ash and soot. You saw the picture of covering the bread belt of the United States, but it also blows the ash into the upper stratosphere. That circles the planet. You may have 3 weeks of no sunlight or minimum sunlight. But the real problem is you get acid rain. The acid rain comes down, it kills the crops, kills the plankton in the ocean, and we lose a lot of the food on the planet, which may be why they're building the 1,400 seed banks that I showed you in the beginning. And there's also 129 deep underground military bases. Interesting, they call them dumb, deep underground military base. It's not so dumb, it's smart. A lot of people feel that they feel this vibrating. You remember years ago the Taos hum, T-A-O-S in New Mexico, the Taos hum, if you ever heard of that. And a lot of people believe that's the drilling that takes place under the ground to create these bases. There's 129 of them. They interconnect all under the United States, and that's the plan to go underground. And I also was reading a book about colonizing Mars, and there was a comment in there that it would be a lot cheaper and doable to just go deep underground. The money it takes to go to the moon, it takes to go to colonize Mars, you don't have that kind of money. And nothing is going to, no asteroid strike, nothing is going to affect you if you're miles under the ground, and that's where you're living. So that's what's going on right now. And they're connecting tunnels for this. Then you look at, in this I try to pull together a lot of different things I read, and I could be reading something that, like I mentioned, that mitochondrial DNA, 74,000 years ago, that supervolcano blew. The guy who discovered that was actually, he was a doctor and a geologist, let's say. He was at a conference and they were talking about why did the human race almost get wiped out 74,000 years ago? Well, he was the only one at the conference that knew the supervolcano blew. Raised his hand, told them, they figured it out. A lot of the stuff that I've come up with, I might be reading Smithsonian magazine and something is said and it kind of applies to this. So I try to pull everything together. There's been 5 great civilizations that we believe existed: Lemuria, Atlantis, Egypt, Rome, and the United States. And I don't know if the supervolcano scenario might be the way that the United States is destroyed. I was doing a conference last year in Baltimore, a Fortean conference, and I made that comment that there's 5 great civilizations, and in the question and answer period at the end, this woman raised her hand and said, why would you say the United States is a great civilization? Why would you include the United States as a great civilization? And my reply to her was, just think about it. Everything that this world is right now was created by either the United States or Europe. It was Western civilization, our way of thinking, our freedoms. It's all Western technology. 80% of all the patents that are filed right now are filed by Americans. Okay? So I believe this is still the greatest country to live in, the greatest country in the world. We have the strongest military, obviously, for better or for worse. But everything about this country, I still believe that this is the greatest place to live. So yeah, I do categorize the United States as being one of the 5 great civilizations that have existed. Like Hamlet's to be or not to be. Now picture your current frustrations. Housing prices have collapsed. Stock prices are down probably still 30%. Unemployment's over 10% or 9.7%. You lost a lot of money in your 401k, so did I, right? Everyone's upset, everyone's on the edge right now. Now imagine a series of natural disasters that disrupt the food chain. We lose all power for weeks. It only takes a few weeks without electricity and people will be returning to feudal times. Now picture an asteroid, a global earthquake, or a supervolcano. All events that you have no control over. They're predicted. It's possible, and I believe everyone senses that in their collective memory that it's coming, and it's coming in 2012. Or before? All right, we talked about some other cultures here, the Hopis, the Mayans, the Tibetans. I added this part on UFO art that's found because we talked about these other cultures. This one is a 17th century painting. You see in the left side of the screen a UFO in the corner up there above the cross on the the left side of the screen. That's a close-up of what's shown. Maybe it's a mushroom, I don't know. It looks like a UFO. This is 1338. Here's a painting of a flying balloon. Well, we didn't have any back then. People are painting things that they saw, and that's what people painted back in that era, is what they saw, not what they imagined. Here's a pretty famous picture, and there will be a close-up of it. Right in the middle there is a UFO flashing a light down to the corner of that building, and the next one will be a close-up of that so you can see it a little better. There you go. Now what are they painting? It looks like a UFO to me. And there's so much of this out there. Here's over a crucifixion painting in Yugoslavia. I don't know, it looks like E.T. and his craft. And these paintings are hundreds of years old. Yeah, we're going to get to that one. Here's one in 1660 where a Dutch painting of something in the sky floating. I don't know if you know, Columbus in his journal saw a UFO right before, in 1492, right before discovering America. Here's one from 1803, Japanese, of a flying saucer. But Columbus in his journal has a UFO sighting right before he landed in North America. Okay, here's a painting you're talking about. And you know, I was in Florence last year with my kids. I forgot to go to this museum and look at it, this painting. Here's a guy with his dog looking up at a UFO, and you can see a close-up of it. The other corner of the picture has a mothership with about 8 of these little UFOs coming out of it. That's a hell of imagination. Yeah, that's 400 years ago. Here's one, I don't know how good you can see it. When it blows up, you can't see this. Here's the 10 Commandments, and there are UFOs painted in the sky there as though they gave us the 10 Commandments. Here's some 15th century tapestry. In the top right of the screen, you can see there's a UFO, a hat-shaped UFO. Okay, again, maybe middle left, you see another. That's a close-up of another UFO. Here's one from 1400, a religious painting flying in on a UFO with ships in the background. You know, when I blew them up, that's as good as it gets. I have to apologize for that. It seems like one of the largest that you can't see it. Here's a French painting from 776, 1,200 years ago, during the Crusades. There's a UFO. They started the Crusades. Another painting with a UFO. This is a Indian bill currency. Along the bottom there are UFOs in the bottom right of the screen, hat-shaped. Here's 1710 painting, a UFO shining a light down on I think it was the birth of Jesus. Again, here's another picture. I mean, come on, they're flying carpets, but these are guys with guns flying. You know, here's a Sumerian god, and we can go into Sumeria and talk about that for quite a while. With what they had written about extraterrestrials coming to the Earth. Petroglyphs found 5,000 years old. They look like, to me, they look like astronauts. They look people in spacesuits. This has been around forever. And I just wanted to show some of these paintings in different cultures and what's out there, because we're not told the real history of our past. That's just the Mars face on there. But you know, people ask me about ufology because, like I said, I'm the state director for Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and I do a lot of radio shows, and I just tell them what the Air Force said. The Air Force taught a course in Colorado Springs from 1968 to 1970. It was a Physics 370 course, and it was on UFOs. Chapter 33 was on UFOs. They were teaching that to the Air Force cadets. And in that chapter, it says that UFOs and extraterrestrials have been here up to 50,000 years. So, you know, I'm not making it up. I just go along with what the Air Force says. That's what the Air Force says. So when they ask me, the skeptics ask me that on radio shows, well, there's no proof. How do you? Well, hey, look, this is what the Air Force said. And the Air Force says that the Air Force says that they're not a threat to our national defense. Maybe. I agree with that. I don't think they haven't invaded us. If they were going to, they would have. It wouldn't be hard to seed the planet and kill us all if they wanted the planet. They might not be a threat to national defense, but they're definitely a threat to your safety, because 3% of people believe they've been abducted. And I've had Dr. Jacob speak. He believes there's a hybridization program going on. People are being abducted. That's 9 million people in the United States. You know, is there an agreement between our government to get technology and we don't stop them? Probably because we can't stop them. You know, I also believe that this ufology has had a huge influence over religion and evolution. I think that we've mistaken extraterrestrials for angels and demons. That's what was really seen was extraterrestrials, and that's what you got a lot of in religion and in folklore. And I also think that we're a product of genetic engineering. Evolution doesn't add up. Cro-Magnon doesn't add up, you know. I think that, like I said, those extra genes, et cetera, I think that we're a product of mixing two species. I also think that they came here as missionaries. For a long time, I had this conflict between religion and ufology. The religion can't be right. This is what it is. But then it finally hit me. I said, what if they came spreading the word of God? They believe in one God. They came here spreading the word of God. They were missionaries. And they gave us the 10 Commandments. They tried to civilize us a little bit. They interfered in our DNA, maybe every 25,800 years ago. So that's what I believe. And that's me. If you're interested in my book, it's next door. And I also have some other DVDs on other talks that I've given. Thank you. You know, do you want me to take a question? Do you want me to?
Yeah, there's a couple of minutes if you want.
Okay. All right. All right. Let's do this. Does anybody have a question?